Under the blazing lights of Congress, Barack Obama and Marjorie Taylor Greene collide in a battle over truth and survival. With more than 20 million lives hanging in the balance and a nation watching live, every word strikes like a weapon. Anger, defiance, and raw emotion tear through the chamber as history itself feels on trial. Will one line of truth be enough to shatter a wall of lies? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room exploded with light cameras flashing like gunfire as the red live sign burned. Every eye locked forward, the silence so sharp it felt like glass about to shatter. Reporters leaned in pens, frozen, the whole nation waiting for the first blow. Marjorie Taylor Greene stormed to the microphone, her heels striking the floor like hammers. She didn't pause, didn't breathe. Her voice cut through the air, cold and furious. Obamacare is a disaster. It strips Americans of their freedom in healthcare, forces them to pay higher premiums, while leaving millions to die in the hands of bureaucracy. The words detonated, ricocheting off the marble walls. Gasps ripped across the chamber. Republican lawmakers nodded, some pounding the desk in approval. The audience stirred in shock, the tension rising like a fuse burning fast. The attack had landed sharp, brutal, and impossible to ignore. The words of Greene were still vibrating in the air like a blade that had just been swung when the chamber shifted. Reporters craned their necks, the crowd leaned forward, and cameras zoomed in, waiting for the counterstrike. The energy was heavy, volatile, like a storm sitting on the horizon. Then, with calm that almost felt unreal, Barack Obama leaned toward his microphone. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He let the silence stretch, pulling every heartbeat tighter, until his first words broke through like the crack of distant thunder. His eyes were steady, unflinching calm in a way that only sharpened the suspense. The chamber seemed to lean into his presence, as if balance had suddenly shifted. He began, his tone clear, but measured, his gaze locked on Greene as if cutting through her bravado. Mrs. Greene, in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that Obamacare is constitutional, and that decision protected the right of millions of American families to access health care. The words were deliberate, each syllable a counterpunch, each phrase backed by the weight of law and history. For a moment, the furious noise that Greene had unleashed just minutes earlier seemed to evaporate, replaced by the quiet steel of Obama's reply. The cameras captured every flicker of his expression, and what struck the audience most was the calm. This was not a man rattled by insults, not a man playing for applause. He spoke as if the law itself were standing behind him, steady, unshakable. Every eye in the chamber felt the gravity. Some reporters scribbled furiously, underlining the words Supreme Court and constitutional. Others just stared, stunned by how he had shifted the atmosphere with only a single carefully constructed sentence. The tension was no less sharp, but it had changed shape. It was no longer just fire and fury. It was anticipation of the blow Greene would struggle to answer. Obama paused, letting the silence hang, then pressed forward. His voice carried the calm of a teacher, but underneath it was a blade of challenge. When we talk about the truth, we should rely on evidence, not on slogans. The line was a scalpel cutting directly into the heart of Greene's performance. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic in volume. It was dramatic in force, a dismissal of theatrics, a demand that the chamber return to the ground of facts. Viewers at home could feel it, the shift from chaos to clarity, the clash of noise against reason. It was the kind of moment that rewrote the rhythm of a hearing, when the room itself seemed to recognize who carried the weight of credibility. Across from him, Greene's face stiffened. She leaned back slightly, but her eyes burned, her jaw tightened. She had walked in brimming with defiance, but now a shadow of unease crossed her expression. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The camera caught it, an unguarded flash of discomfort, the first visible crack in her armor. She didn't speak immediately, and that silence spoke louder than her earlier rage. The chamber picked up on it. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats. Reporters whispered behind their hands. The storm of Greene's words had met the stone wall of Obama's calm, and the impact was undeniable. The clash had only just begun. The calm that followed Obama's measured reply snapped like a wire as Greene lunged for the next move. Cameras tightened their focused glass eyes, hunting for tremor or fear. Staffers froze mid-keystroke, sensing the turn from quiet steel to open clash. The red live light throbbed like a pulse, daring someone to blink first. Green didn't blink. She reached down and yanked a thick stack of papers into the light. Paper edges flashed like blades under the floodlamps. She slapped the stack onto the desk, the crack sharp enough to turn heads in the back rows. Her jaw was set, her voice rough with bite, and she dragged a finger under a line of bold text, as if carving a mark into the wood. She lifted the top page toward the cameras, letting the columns and charts fill the screens at home. The room tightened around her, drawn by the promise of numbers. Then she leaned into the mic, letting every word punch clean through the air. Look at these numbers. Premiums doubled after Obamacare. Americans were deceived. The line hit like a siren, bright and blaring. Every camera surged forward to catch her face. She held the page high, then swept it wide so the lenses could drink in every bar graph and highlight. With her free hand, she chopped the air, turning statistics into strikes, rhythm into drumbeat. She flipped to another sheet and jabbed at circles of neon ink, building a wall of charts between herself and doubt. Producers in the gallery whispered for close-ups, and red tally lights jumped from one camera to the next. The papers rustled like a storm, and she made the storm hers. She pressed the advantage, rolling the edges of the stack against the desk, like a dealer flexing a new deck. She turned her shoulders to give the press a cleaner angle, then pivoted back to the dais so lawmakers would feel the blow head-on. Her eyes swept the room, daring anyone to call her bluff while the pages glowed under the lamps. She lifted the same line again, with the same iron tone, letting its echo stack on itself. The performance was tight, muscular, and built for television. Even the pauses were cut to commercial length. She wanted impact, not nuance, and impact is what she drove across the room. Gasps popped like flashbulbs. In the third row, a woman covered her mouth. Near the aisle, a man muttered, "She's got the receipts." A few Republican lawmakers nodded hard knuckles, drumming approval against Wood. Murmurs rippled outward, the chamber recalibrating around the weight of paper in her hands. For a heartbeat, the stack looked like proof, and the ink looked like truth, and that heartbeat is all a broadcast needs. The sense landed fast and loud. It looked to more than a few, like Marjorie. Taylor Greene had evidence. The chamber still hummed with Greene's charts when the rhythm shifted. A single, steady motion drew every camera back to Obama. He reached beneath the dais and lifted a slim, blue-backed folder, the cover stamped with the seal of the Department of Health and Human Services 2016. He didn't rush. He placed it on the desk like a referee setting down the rulebook. Pages slid open with a clean, dry whisper, neat tabs catching the light. He turned one page, then another, as if walking the room back from noise to facts. The red live light held steady, and so did he. He angled the microphone a notch closer, eyes level, voice even and grounded. No flourish, no extra breath, just the line that mattered. Thanks to Obamacare, more than 20 million people have health coverage, including millions of children and veterans. Rising costs are not because of Obamacare, but because insurance companies seek to maximize profits. The quote landed like a bolt that chooses its mark, quick and undeniable. He let the words stand on their own, not padded by adjectives, not softened by apology. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of the room recalculating. He kept the folder open, one finger resting on a highlighted line, his posture saying this is not theater. In the front row, a boom mic dipped instinctively, hunting for the next sentence. But he didn't gild it. He had already said enough. Viewers at home saw the contrast paper versus paper, but one set spoke in plain numbers and the other in high volume. A producer whispered for a tight shot on the HHS seal. The lens obeyed. The camera found the date, the headings, the government stamped, the visual grammar of credibility. It wasn't flashy, which made it hit harder. Across the press bench, heads began to nod before hands even moved. A senior reporter underlined a single phrase, then underlined it again. Another lifted her eyes from the page and gave a small clip nod toward her cameraman. Keep rolling, this matters. In the second tier, a correspondent mouthed the words 20 million as if testing their weight in real time. You could feel the air tilt just a few degrees, but enough to change direction. The mood didn't explode. It pivoted clean and sharp. He closed the folder half an inch, still visible, still present, letting the room live inside the numbers for a beat longer. No one needed a lecture. The point had already found its mark. The line about children and veterans sat in the center of the frame like a bright pin, and the frame refused to move. Pen started again, crisp strokes replacing earlier scribbles. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer whispered, "That's the clip." And up front, a few reporters finally plainly nodded. The steady weight of the report still hung in the air when Obama lifted his hand, a quiet signal to the technicians at the back. Screens flickered, and the chamber lights dimmed just enough for the projection to seize the room. The sudden shift of brightness made every head turn. The buzz of side talk collapsed into silence. The first frame appeared an American flag in the corner of a hospital ward, the colors muted but proud. Then the camera panned to a man in uniform, his face worn, his eyes carrying both pain and survival. The hush thickened. The veteran's voice filled the chamber, low, but steady, carrying the weight of a battlefield and a hospital bed. "I fought in Iraq. I came home broken. My body gave out, my bills piled up, and I was drowning. Then I was told the surgery I needed would bankrupt my family. But because of the Affordable Care Act, because of Obamacare, I got the operation. I am alive today because of Obamacare." His words were not shouted, not polished, but they struck like steel against stone. He didn't plead, he testified. Every syllable settled into the wood-paneled walls, into the microphones, into the millions watching live. The room itself seemed to lean closer to the screen. Even the shuffle of papers stopped, as if the hearing had been pulled into one man's story. On the press bench, reporters froze mid-keystroke, some blinking faster than usual, others lowering their pens altogether. In the gallery, a woman clutched her chest, her lips parting in silent breath. The soldier's face on screen did not tremble, but the impact he left did. When the video ended, the chamber did not erupt. It did not rush to noise. Instead, a silence rolled over the rows, thick, heavy, undeniable. It was not the silence of indifference, but of something harder to control, emotion. For a few seconds, there was no cough, no shuffle, no muttered word. The only sound was the faint hum of the screen as it faded to black. The pause stretched just long enough for the message to lodge deeper, for the weight of his sentence to sit on every shoulder. "I am alive today because of Obamacare." All eyes shifted back to the dais where Obama remained, still, his hands folded loosely before him. He didn't add commentary, didn't spike the moment with more rhetoric. He let the veteran's voice echo, let the testimony work without interference. That restraint made the scene even sharper, the silence even louder. The cameras swept the chamber, capturing expressions locked in concentration, in discomfort, in reconsideration. On the far side, Marjorie Taylor Greene's face betrayed what words could not cover. The red climbed her cheeks, her jaw tight, her eyes darting away from the monitors. She gripped her papers too hard, the edges bending under her fingers. For someone who had entered the room like a storm, she now looked caught in her own weather, flustered, unprepared. The image of a soldier alive because of a law she called a disaster had landed with crushing force. The shift was undeniable, and the chamber knew it. The shift was undeniable. Then the backlash slammed down. MTG hit the table with an open palm, the crack ricocheting off marble and microphones. Papers jumped, a pen rolled, and the cameras snapped to her like magnets. She leaned into the mic, eyes blazing, voice pitched to cut through the room. "That is a staged script. Obama bribed the witness." The words knifed through the air, sharp and deliberate. Noise exploded at once, a wall of voices rising from every row. "Order, Mr. Chair," one lawmaker barked, while another shouted, "Point of order." Order reporters half stood scrambling for angles, their headsets buzzing with frantic cues. The red live light burned hotter, bathing the chaos in broadcast gloss. Staffers waved for calm, but the swell kept climbing, a storm trapped inside four walls. Every face swung between shock and fury, waiting for someone to seize control. MTG tried to be that someone, even as the edges of her composure frayed. Her jaw locked tight, shoulders, squared chin, lifted like a shield. She gripped her papers too hard, the corners bending under her thumbs. Her eyes flicked across the dais, daring the room to push back, then returned to the cameras as if they were allies. The mask of toughness stayed on, but the tremor around it told another story. She looked like a fire she could not fully command. Then Obama reset the room with a single motion. He did not argue. He simply lifted a document into the light, the paper crisp against the hush. The header read American Medical Association 2017, the seal clear enough for every camera to drink in. He turned the cover so the lenses could catch the line that mattered, a letter signed by more than 100,000 physicians, publicly supporting the Affordable Care Act. He didn't pound the table or chase the noise. He let the weight of authorship do the talking. In a world of sound bites, he held up signatures. He adjusted the mic a fraction, breathing space into the moment before he spoke. His cadence was slow, even careful enough to land in every living room tuned to the feed. This is not politics. This is the voice of doctors, the people who save lives every day. The sentence moved like a gavel, not loud but final. Words that did not ask to be believed so much as recognized. He lowered the page half an inch, as if to say the document would stand in the frame with him. The chamber absorbed it, first in silence, then in posture spines. Straightened hands, stilled eyes, narrowed with focus instead of fury. On the press bench, pens touched paper again. No scramble, just deliberate notes. A producer whispered, "Hold that shot," and the tally light clung to the AMA seal. Viewers at home felt the pivot. The theater had thinned and the record had thickened. It was the sensation of an argument being sealed with reason, not volume. The air calmed without cooling. He did not chase applause with extra lines. Restraint became its own proof. The letter stayed visible the year 2017 and the organization name anchoring the screen like coordinates on a map. He let the authorship doctors, thousands of them, carry the moral freight that slogans could not. The contrast drew itself, one side waving charts the other, presenting a consensus of healers. Cameras tracked the simple geometry of the scene document, speaker seal because simplicity now looked like strength. Around him, the noise that had swelled minutes earlier had nowhere left to go. Even those who had bristled at the start felt the room settle under a steadier pulse. Chairs stopped creaking. Whispers lost the nerve to rise. Somewhere near the aisle, a skeptic folded his arms more slowly, eyes pinned to the signatures as if counting credibility, line by line. The document did not argue with anyone. It verified itself. Obama's hands were steady, his gaze level, his voice done for now. And across the country, millions understood exactly what that meant. That calm, reasoned hush around the AMA letter lasted one heartbeat, then the counterflare hit. MTG snapped upright, breath sharp, and her voice shot across the microphones like a siren. She planted her hands on the desk shoulders, squared eyes blazing at the cameras. Doctors have been bought off by the progressive camp. This is a conspiracy. The words landed hard, fast, and absolute, daring anyone to blink. The gallery jolted as if the floor had tilted beneath their feet. The accusation hung in the air, electric and raw, while the AMA seal still glowed on the monitors. A few Republican lawmakers broke eye contact and stared into their folders as if the margins could steady the room. One adjusted his tie twice without meaning to. Another lifted a water bottle but never drank. They knew the line sounded extreme, and defending it on live television could corner them fast. Chairs creaked, eyes slid downward, whispers thinned into uneasy silence. The distance between the document in Obama's hand and the charge from Green felt like a canyon. The press bench ignited into motion, every seat a small command post. Pens scratched in short, hard strokes. Keyboards clattered. Headsets filled with clipped whispers. "Stay wide, keep her framed." A producer mouthed, "Flag the claim," while a veteran reporter underlined conspiracy 3 times in block ink. Photographers leaned into the aisle to catch the strain in her jaw and the flash in her eyes. Someone drafted a lower third. Green alleges doctors bought off by progressives and held it ready for air. The noise of note-taking became its own rhythm, steady, relentless, and broadcast ready. Green tried to turn the surge into strength, but the edges of control were already fraying. She squared her stance and held the glare, yet her papers shook and a page corner bent under her thumb until it almost tore. She repeated the line under her breath as if repetition could harden it into armor before saying it again. The camera caught everything, the heat, the shake, the bravado, stretched over a rattled core. She looked defiant, but the cracks showed in ways no lighting bank could hide. Tough on the surface, she still looked like a blaze she could no longer steer. Producers traded hand signals inside their earpieces. Markers squeaked across notepads underlining the same claim. A camera drifted wider, holding both letter and accuser. The red live light burned steady and unforgiving. Everyone felt the strain. On the dais, a gavel hovered unused as eyes swung back to the screens again. Reporters compared timestamps, syncing the quote across feeds to lock down context before push alerts. In the second row, a whip counted votes in his head, then closed his notebook. Aid badges flashed as runners slipped out phones, pressed tight drafting lines for damage control. Green fixed her stare on the lens jaw, locked, determined to look unbreakable for the replay. But the room's temperature had changed and viewers could feel it travel through the broadcast. The accusations still buzzed through the room when Obama reached for a different kind of proof. He slid a thin binder onto the desk and opened to a page stamped with the FBI crest, the dateline reading 2021. A technician threw the document onto the hearing screens, and the seal filled the frame in unforgiving clarity. Headings snapped into focus field summaries, case synopses, and interstate trend charts flagged in hard red. The narrative was plain states that cut back or rolled back elements tied to the Affordable Care Act saw a surge in healthcare fraud schemes aimed at poor communities. The warning was not dressed up. It was written like a hazard label. Fraud rings had multiplied where protections thinned, and the consequences were not just dollars, they were human lives. Obama turned a page and the bullet points hit like short controlled bursts. Agents reported false billing mills clustering around clinics in counties that slashed ACA-aligned oversight. Ghost providers, sham equipment claims, and kickback networks bloomed where enforcement budgets were gutted. The analysis paired those spikes with county mortality charts that ticked up among low-income patients after rollbacks. The line between crime and harm was not theoretical. It was drawn in dates, filings, and death certificates. On-screen photos, sealed boxes, seized drives, taped invoices gave the graphs a heartbeat. The room felt the thud of it. He did not raise his voice when he closed the loop. He just made the connection and owned it. Mrs. Green, the truth is that when you dismantle the ACA, you are not just attacking me, you are attacking the lives of the American people. The sentence moved through the microphones like a measured strike, no echo needed, no flourish required. For a beat, the chamber froze around the words as if the floor itself had to absorb them before anyone could breathe. Then the breath erupted, a wall of sound, sharp and immediate, breaking the tension like glass. The quote was already halfway to a chyron, clean and lethal. Noise swelled into a roar. The galleries trembled with voices and the cameras chased the wave. A cluster of Democratic lawmakers shot to their feet, palms cracking in hard applause that cut through the din. Others followed an instant later, the aisle blooming with motion and open hands. The gavel hammered for order, but the applause ran hot over it, a tide that would not pull back on command. Across the press bench, heads jerked up as producers barked, "That's the pull, roll it again," and lenses swung to catch the standing silhouettes. On every screen, the scene locked in report, seal sentence, and the room blowing open. The roar from the last exchange ebbed into a thin hush, and then a small movement in the back row drew every eye. A woman rose slowly, both hands wrapped around a framed photograph, knuckles white against the glass. An usher hesitated, then stepped aside as she began to walk down the aisle, her shoulders squared by something heavier than fear. The camera nearest the center rail pivoted to track her, its lens swallowing the distance in a smooth, hungry glide. Reporters lifted their heads in unison, pens hovering, unsure if this was allowed or if it even mattered anymore. The room seemed to lean toward her without moving, as if the air itself had decided to make space. She reached the witness rail and paused, adjusting her grip so the photo would not tremble in her hands. In the frame, a young man smiled in a sun-bleached baseball cap, his arms slung around a kid sister whose grin was almost too big for her face. The glass caught the light of the hearing lamps, throwing a clean white stripe across his cheek like a scar of brightness. She pressed the frame to her chest as if holding him in place for one more second. An aide whispered to the chair, received a small nod, and stepped back to let the moment stand. The gallery stilled, the kind of stillness you can hear. When she spoke, the edges of her voice scraped like someone pulling a chair across concrete. She did not try to sound prepared. She sounded like a person trying not to break. If this law had come earlier, my son would have lived. The sentence ran through the microphones as if they had been waiting for that exact shape of words all day. On screens across the country, the lower third caught it in clean type, a simple line no one could file down. Her head tipped toward the photo chin, almost touching the glass, and she shut her eyes as if bracing against a wave. The cameraman on the left aisle tightened his shot until the edges of the room fell away. You could see the small details, the hairline crack at the corner of the frame, the way one fingernail was chewed short, the careful polish on the others, the distance in her gaze that comes from too many nights without sleep. Light flattened the background into soft blur, leaving only her face and the boy in the picture. Somewhere a pen clicked and never unclicked. The sound system breathed quietly and then went perfectly still. Nothing else moved. In the second row, a staffer lowered her laptop lid without meaning to, as if the screen had become louder than the story. A journalist stopped typing. Mid-sentence, blinked twice, and set his hands palm down on the table, like he had to feel something solid. A Capitol Police officer shifted his wait eyes, softening for a heartbeat he likely would deny later. The silence did not sag. It held like a pulled strap, tight and deliberate and unbreakable. Even the air felt different, as if it had grown a spine. The photograph caught in the center of the shot did the talking. On the far side of the dais, Marjorie Taylor Greene's posture changed by fractions a television audience could still read. Her eyes dropped from the screens to the desk, then to the papers clamped under her hand, and stayed there as if the print could shield her. A pulse climbed in her neck, visible for a moment, before it vanished under a blade-straight jaw. She pressed her lips together and did not speak, the kind of quiet that looks like retreat even when it is meant to be poise. Her fingers smoothed the page that did not need smoothing. The camera cut away before it could look unkind. Obama stood without a sound, the movement so measured it did not disturb the weight of the moment. He stepped around the edge of the table, never taking his eyes off the photo until he reached the woman's side. The floor mic picked up the soft scuff of his shoe and then nothing at all. He did not reach for the frame. He honored the hold she had on it as if it were sacred property. He angled himself so the cameras could see her face without crowding her space. His hand stayed visible, palm open, carrying no argument. Up close, the frame reflected his suit jacket for a second. A dark stripe curved across the boy's smile like a river at dusk. The woman looked up and met his eyes, and something human and ordinary passed between them that did not need a name. Her breath shook, once then steadied. She did not repeat herself. She did not need to. The sentence she had placed in the middle of the hearing was already rooted. Around them, the room remembered to inhale. The chair did not strike the gavel. Even order for a rare moment understood it was not required. A lawmaker in the third row folded his hands and looked at the photo, like he was doing math he could not afford to get wrong. The press bench did not scribble. It recorded with the wide-eyed attention usually reserved for verdicts. The gallery leaned in and went still again. The stillness of people who recognize the exact second a conversation changes for good. Above the cameras, the red light burned steady, as if heat alone could keep the picture clear. The boy in the cap kept smiling as photographs do. Obama lifted his right hand and rested it gently on the woman's shoulder. The touch, brief and careful, a promise to support without taking. The room held its breath a second time. He looked at the committee, then at the cameras, then back to the photograph, and only then did he speak. This is why America builds a wall of truth, not a wall of lies. The line went out clean, a single stroke, across the noise, a beam laid between one life and a nation's choices. It needed no echo. The chamber gave it one anyway in silence. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.